Hello and welcome to Farm Management Fridays, making farmland transition options available to landowners. This webinar is a collaboration amongst three organizations: the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension, American Farmland Trust, and the Farmland Access Hub. My name is Kaitlyn Davis, and I'm the Agricultural Outreach Specialist for UW-Madison Division of Extension. And joining me today are
I'm Alison Volk, Deputy Director of Land Protection at American Farmland Trust.
I'm Bonnie Warndahl. I'm a Farmland Access Navigator with the Farmland Access Hub and a Farmland Access Specialist at Renewing the Countryside.
And I'm Mia Ljung. I'm a Community Development Educator with Extension for Outagamie and Winnebago Counties. Next slide, please. In today's webinar, we will cover some farmland transition topic areas, such as the current state of farmland in the United States as well as Wisconsin.
Demystifying the future farmer. The new generation of American farmers looks different than their historical counterparts. We'll go over the challenges they face and ways landowners can help to ensure their success.
Agricultural conservation easements, what they are and why a landowner might choose to protect their farm.
And buy, protect, sell, we have a chance to chat about determining if agricultural conservation easements are a component of buy, protect, sell. We'll have a chance to chat a little bit more about if determining if buy, protect, sell is the right fit for your farm's legacy. It helps those who may be struggling to transition their land to the next generation through a process of selling the land to a trust. Alison Volk will go into a little bit more detail of that in a little bit. And so throughout this presentation, we'll also have some integrated common questions we have received around this topic to assist in providing answers to those questions. So let's go ahead and dive into our first topic, the current state of farmland. So on your screen, you should be seeing two maps. The first map, taken from the USDA NASS August 2022 statistics, shows an increase in real estate value by state from 2021 to 2022. Those states that have seen a significant increase of dollars per acre can be seen using a deep red and an orange color. Wisconsin alone saw a 9.8% increase in farmland value over the course of a year. This leads to the second map that you see that comes from the American Farmland Trust publications, Farms Under Threat 2040. This map indicates the land that is best suited for intensive food and crop production. From this map, we can see higher portions of land concentrated in the Midwest, where we've seen a large increase in dollars per acre as indicated on the first map. With limited farmland available and increasing costs, it makes it harder for land to transfer from one generation to the next. As indicated by the maps, this is happening all across the United States. This is why it's so important to look that current landowners look at all the options available to them to assist with protecting their farm legacy and passing the farm from one generation to the next. Let's dive a bit deeper into the state of agriculture and look closer at Wisconsin.
Thank you, Kaitlyn. Yep, let's get some understanding of how Wisconsin is doing in terms of conversion of land that is best suited for intensive food and crop production. So Wisconsin scored among the top states for the conversion of agricultural land to urban and highly developed and low density residential uses. So the diagram here to the left shows also the policy response in relation to this conversion threat, putting Wisconsin in the orange box because its conversion threat is higher than its policy response relative to other states. And Wisconsin scored in the middle of all states for policies and programs to protect agricultural land from development, promote farm viability, and facilitate the transfer of agricultural land. And what does this really mean? Well, it means that Wisconsin has work to do when it comes to protecting prime farmland, and that landowners, community members, local governments, land trusts, and policymakers need to figure out ways to ensure suitable food supply and farm viability into the future. Next slide, please. And so the American Farmland Trust made these very beautiful scenarios. Well, some maybe not as beautiful as the other, but we just wanted to take a look at what these mean in terms of land use. And can you just progress to the bullet points there? Thank you, Kaitlyn. So the first one that you can see to the right, business as usual, it means development follows recent patterns. So recent patterns according to local communities and regions. That means poorly planned development and low density residential sprawl continue to rapidly convert farmland and ranch land. And then the red scenario, which is in the middle, is the runaway sprawl, and development becomes even less efficient than in business as usual. The low density housing sweeps across the countryside, displacing farmers and ranchers. And then the green scenarios is the better built cities. That's the scenario that obviously is preferred if we want to save our farmland and make farmland available and viable for future farmers. That means policymakers and land use planners promote compact development and reduce sprawl, saving irreplaceable farmland and ranchland from conversion. And here the role of the farmland protection is to permanently protect farms based on their agricultural quality and proximity to other farms that reinforces compact development. And then next slide, please. Thank you, Kaitlyn. So we just wanted to zoom in on, in the area actually where I live, in Appleton, Wisconsin, just taking a look at the two scenarios. To the left, you see a map of the better built cities, and then to the right, you see the runaway sprawl. And you can really see, it's hard to tell with the colors, but when you look at the right, there's a lot of orange and red, which indicates both, let me just check my notes here quick. Urban and highly developed developments, and a lot more development and a lot less farmland saved. I wanted you to also just check in the location to the west of Appleton, which is the village of Greenville. They've seen this firsthand, and I've worked with that committee, as well as Alison Volk here has worked with that committee in Greenville, Wisconsin. Since 1990, Greenville's population has tripled from 3,806 in 1990 to 12,600 in 2020. And it's actually projected to grow to 16,390 residents by 2040. So there's a lot of pressures to balance for that community. And then today, approximately 40%, so about 9,000 acres of Greenville's land covers agricultural, but back in 1970, it was 74%. So a huge change of agricultural land base, over 30%. And then approximately 71% of the village of Greenville soil is considered prime farmland. But much of the soil, like I mentioned, has been developed and converted to other uses. But in the last 30 years, the village in Greenville has really been active in figuring out ways to protect the farmland that they have still available to them. And so we're really hopeful that they will be following more of the better built cities development pattern. Thank you.
Thanks, Mia. Those are some pretty troubling insights about land use. And it doesn't help that our incoming farmers are struggling to gain access to the land that's left for farming. By incoming or emerging farmers, we're generally referring to beginning farmers, defined by the USDA as having farmed for 10 years or less. Sometimes, however, incoming farmers are immigrant farmers. Both groups are valuable to society, and both groups face myriad barriers with access to farmland being at the top. This is usually due to real estate prices or the lack of available farmland close to markets. Tends to be close to metro areas where land prices are a lot more expensive, but of course, like those are the population density that farmers need to access to be able to sell their product. Access to capital comes in at a close second as a barrier to farmland access, and affordable access to healthcare is the third most significant barrier for incoming farmers. So this is a big problem for Americans. Our current population of producers is aging out. It is expected that 70% of farmland will change hands in the next 20 years. According to the American Farmland Trust, 40% of America's agricultural land will transfer ownership within the next 15 years. Yet few landowners seem to be aware of ways to keep their farmland in farmland. Because of these barriers, though, alternative models of transferring land from one farm to another is increasingly important.
Thank you, Bonnie, for giving us a glimpse on what the future farmer looks like and the struggles they face as they pursue their agricultural goals. Current landowners can have a big impact on the future land development by looking at keeping their farmland as active farming. These next few models will talk a bit about how current landowners can utilize alternative models to assist with that. So the first one I want to talk about is land contracts. This is an alternative name for these is contract for deed. So this is a type of contract in land ownership is great for beginner farmers who are seeking permanent land but don't have that initial capital in order to purchase the land, or don't qualify for an institutional loan. The contract can be established to have the beginner farmer pay the current landowner over time. Then there's always non-family land transfer. Another alternative that current landowners could consider is transferring ownership to non-family members. This can be a bit overwhelming to the current landowners. They're navigating looking for the right fit to take over the business. It's important that the current landowners have an idea of what goals they have for the transfer of their farm. There are a lot of great resources for developing your goals for the farm at the UW-Madison Division of Extension Farm Management website. Another alternative land model for land access is looking at cooperative land access. So farmers are working together to pool their resources, capital, and knowledge to form cooperatives in order to purchase land. So let's dive a little bit deeper into two of these alternative models of land access: agricultural conservation easement and buy, protect, sell.
Thanks, Kaitlyn. So before we jump into buy, protect, sell, I want to talk a little bit about agricultural conservation easements, what they are, what a land trust does, and the land trust's role with a conservation easement, some of the benefits of an easement, and some of the drawbacks or challenges to having an easement on person's land. Next slide, please. An agricultural conservation easement is a voluntary deed restriction that a landowner places on their land. The easement removes the development rights from the property in order to permanently protect the land for future agricultural use. Typically, a landowner will work with a land trust or a local government authority to develop the easement, and that easement is tailored to the specific characteristics of the property. The land trust or the local government is called the easement holder, and it's the holder's responsibility to monitor and enforce the terms of the easement. So this means that once an easement is in place on property, someone will visit the land every year to ensure that the terms of the easement are being followed. And this continues regardless of who owns the underlying property. An easement can be donated or sold. When an easement is sold, the landowner will receive a payment that's equal to the value of the conservation easement. The land trust or the local government typically utilize public funding to help in purchasing the easement from the landowner. Unfortunately, in Wisconsin, there's not a lot of public funding available, so most of the time, conservation easements are donated to an eligible organization. This donation enables a landowner to claim a federal charitable tax deduction. So in some instances, the donation of a conservation easement can fit in well with your estate planning. And we encourage you to talk to a financial advisor if this is something that you think you might be interested in. Once the easement is in place, the landowner retains all the other rights associated with owning the property. So the land can be sold, bequeathed, leased, or mortgaged against. The landowner continues to make all management decisions for the property and maintains the responsibility for paying the property taxes. Next slide, please. An agricultural conservation easement is a special kind of conservation easement. It's written specifically to enable the continued agricultural use of the property. So while the easement removes the potential for developing the property, placing non-farm residential houses on the property or subdividing and turning the farm into a subdivision, the easement allows the landowner to continue operating the land as a farm. This means that the easement is generally pretty flexible to allow landowners to adapt to changing technologies in farming, and the easement doesn't dictate the type of agriculture that occurs on the property. It's really set up to make sure that the land can continue to be farmed and that incompatible uses are restricted and prevented from challenging the future agricultural use of the property. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see some examples of permitted uses and restricted uses under a conservation easement. It's really meant to encapsulate all different types of uses that you might want to employ if you are running a viable agricultural operation on your farm. So an easement will allow for landowner housing, farm worker housing, any type of agricultural infrastructure, on-farm energy production. So that's any type of infrastructure that might allow you to power buildings or operations on the farm. And it also contemplates being able to implement a agricultural practices management plan to protect the soil and water resources of the farm. What's restricted is subdividing the property into multiple parcels, non-farm residential development, or non-agricultural commercial or industrial uses. Next slide, please. So why might a landowner choose to protect their land with an agricultural conservation easement? Well, an easement offers the assurance that the land will be available for future agricultural use. Landowners invest so much of themselves in the health of their land, and an easement protects that investment now and into the future. Another key consideration is that by removing the development rights, a portion of the resale price of the property is also removed. This can often provide affordability for future farmers, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later when we talk about the buy, protect, sell model. So while the easement prevents future subdivision, it doesn't interfere with the landowner's ability to actively farm and manage their farmland. As I said before, the choices for operating the farm continue to be with the farmer, with the landowner. The easement just creates assurance for the landowner and for their neighbors as well that the land will remain in agricultural use and can incentivize then investments into neighboring ag operations. There are some things to be aware of, however, before going down this path of protecting your land. The easement doesn't protect from eminent domain, so an easement isn't a way to avoid having some of your property taken for a road right-of-way, for example. And because the easement limits how a property can be used in the future, it's really important to discuss the easement with members of your family or anyone who currently holds an interest in the property. Again, it's a permanent restriction. It's something that's placed on the property that's recorded with the deed. So it's important for family members, for anybody who's involved with the current operation to know about the easement decision and be involved in any easement discussions around the farm. And one thing to note too is that there's not a lot of public funding available in Wisconsin. So while it would be helpful to be able to pay landowners for protecting their property, to pay them for the value of the development rights, that funding just isn't widely available in the state. And so oftentimes purchase of an easement isn't an option, and landowners who really want to protect their property have to consider donating the value of the easement. If you're interested in a conservation easement, I would recommend as your first step to reach out to a local land trust to discuss your options. The organization Gathering Waters has a website that can help you locate a land trust in Wisconsin. And outside of Wisconsin, American Farmland Trust also has a directory of farmland protection entities. And you can see both of these websites on the screen here. So a conservation easement, as we mentioned before, is a key component of the buy, protect, sell model. And so what is buy, protect, sell? Well, it's actually the name is very descriptive of what it is. So an organization like a land trust purchases farmland, that's the buy, The land is then protected with a conservation easement, which the land trust would then hold and monitor and steward. And then the land trust sells the protected property to an emerging farmer. Buy, protect, sell can be a particularly useful way to help with transitioning farm to the next generation of farmers when landowners don't necessarily have children or family members interested in taking over the farm. Next slide, please. So to understand how this works, it's helpful to understand how an easement is valued. An easement removes the development rights from the property. And with that restriction, with that removal of development rights, the protected property will cost less than a property without any restrictions. So, and this is just hypothetical, if your land is valued at $500,000 and you place an easement on the property and the easement's valued at $200,000, the protected property would be able to be resold to a farmer for $300,000. These values are illustrative, and the exact easement value typically depends on a number of factors, such as development pressure, restrictions or terms in the easement, market value for ag land as ag land. Ultimately, easement value needs to be determined by a qualified appraiser. But what this slide is attempting to do is to highlight how we can use buy, protect, sell to create affordability for emerging farmers. Now you might wonder, well, how does it work? It sounds like you're buying high and selling low. If you're buying my land from me for $500,000 and selling it for $300,000, how do you do that? Well, an organization has to make up that difference either through a public funding source or through a bargain sale by the landowner. Because there isn't a lot of public funding available for easements, land trusts often rely very heavily on a landowner selling the property at a reduced price. And that reduction, what it allows us to do is to protect the farm with an easement, and so permanently protecting the affordability of the property and then selling the protected land to an emerging farmer. Just like with an easement donation, if the landowner contributes some amount of that easement value through a bargain sale, selling to the land trust at a reduced price, this donation is treated as a charitable contribution. And it's important to note again that in the buy, protect, sell model, affordability is protected not just for the next farmer, but future farmers down the line. So buy, protect, sell can be helpful for farmers who are retiring, who care about seeing their land remain in agricultural use, but don't necessarily have anyone lined up to take over their operation. The success of a buy, protect, sell project can really depend on a number of factors, including the price of the land, resources available to the land trust, the timeline, both the timeline for the landowner and the timeline for the land trust, and the feasibility of finding interested buyers. It's helpful to reach out to an organization like AFT to discuss whether your farm and your current situation makes sense for a buy, protect, sell transaction, but it's another tool in the toolbox to consider when you're transitioning your land to the next generation.
So now it's time for a little bit of Q&A. I do have a question. Is there a cost to the landowner to donate an easement?
There is. It's like any real estate transaction. There are costs associated with an easement donation, and typically can work with the land trust to figure out how best to cover those costs. But it's important to note that it's not free.
I have a different question. From your perspective, I know Alison and Bonnie, you've both been working on the different ends of the buy, protect, sell process. How long does it typically take for a buy, protect, sell process?
This can depend on a number of factors, but it's really not something that happens very quickly. It can take a number of months often. You have to go through the process of selling the land to the land trust. So making sure that the land trust needs to make sure that it's able to purchase the land from you. And so this process takes a while. Oftentimes, with AFT, we like to try to make sure that there are emerging farmers who might be interested in purchasing the land from us down the road. So trying to line up all of the pieces can take some time. So it's really important, if this is something that you're interested in, that you're really committed to the ultimate end goal, which is trying to get land in the hands of farmers who need it, and that it's not something that you're trying to get through as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And not just for buy, protect, sell, but for almost any process of transferring land to a beginning farmer or an incoming farmer that's non-conventional takes quite a bit of time. So, you know, with my work as a farmland access navigator, a lot of my clients are trying to purchase property with an FSA, the farm ownership loan, through the Farm Service Agency. And like that process also takes quite a bit of time. It can take 3 to 6 months. Sometimes I've heard it taking as much as 2 years, which is not usually the case, but sometimes it can. So I think it's really important for landowners to keep that in mind, you know, with the legacy of their land, and, you know, really planning ahead and making sure that they're giving themselves plenty of time to make that transition happen successfully. And Alison, I had another question about buy, protect, sell, and just because I haven't had a lot of personal experience with this, you know, how does AFT or other land trust, like, how do you determine which property is a good candidate for BPS? What kind of factors are there, like in terms of, you know, the land itself? Is there you know, certain qualities to the land? Is, you know, like what factors affect that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we like to look at certain things like the viability of the farmland, you know, the quality of the soils, the proximity to markets, and proximity to potential future buyers. So we want to make sure that the land that we're protecting and that we're making available for future farmers is land that future farmers are going to want to farm and are going to be interested in buying. At the same time, you know, we have to be concerned with affordability and price. And so there are times where we're just priced out of being able to purchase land, unless a landowner is willing to, you know, sell it at a real discount. And so we're looking at the, you know, the quality of the farmland, the location and its proximity to other infrastructure, and then the pool of farmers, you know, that are available and interested in purchasing the land from AFT or another organization.
So does an agricultural conservation easement require landowners to allow public access to their land?
No, it doesn't. It's not an agreement that opens your land up. You continue to maintain all of your own rights associated with private ownership. What it's really doing is it's removing the development potential from the property.
Okay, thanks so much for those answers. The last one that I have is, who is your typical landowner that has an agricultural conservation easement on their land?
You know, this can really vary. You know, landowners with all types of different operations have conservation easements on their property, but I think one thing that tends to be in common is people who really care very deeply about the land and what the future of the land is. You know, by placing a conservation easement on their property, they're ensuring that this land remains available for future farmers. And so, you know, if you've invested a lot in this land and the health of the land, an easement makes sure that that land, you know, remains open for others to, you know, enjoy and grow food on as well.
Well, thank you so much, Allison, and Bonnie and Mia for like all of your responses and questions. On this slide are related articles to the topics that you heard about today. So one is specifically about demystifying the future farmer. The other is about just the the agricultural easements, and then the other is about buy, protect, sell. So these will be linked in at the bottom of the video in the description. So if you have any questions or if you're looking for the links to those articles, otherwise, if you go to our website, farms.extension.wisc.edu, they'll be underneath our articles tab. And if you'd like to reach out to any of the speakers here today, including myself, you can find our contact information available on this slide. We again thank you for all joining us today as we talked about making farmland transition options available to landowners. And for any further follow-up, you can also reach out to farms@extension.wisc.edu. Thank you.
Thanks.